anybody there?
Hey, how are you, man?
Hey,
I
good.
was just making sure that my timing was right here.
No, I think your timing was perfectly right. Good. Is it good evening or good morning?
Well, let's see. We're in northern Germany. First of all, how do I sound? I feel like I'm peeking out a little bit. Am I okay?
I think you're golden right now. And it
Oh,
seems
that's
like you
such a
got a good setup going, so I think you're going to sound great.
yeah. I like your setup. I got a similar kind of. I got a little home studio here
Yeah, yeah.
working.
It's kind of a nice little nook to get me
Yeah,
to kind of scream into the microphone
you
sometimes.
you got the family and all that stuff. You got kids and the wife and all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm in the
So
basement right
so
now, so
okay, yeah.
it's 6 o'clock over here. They're just about getting the day started, and I'm like, you know what? Why don't I do interviews in the morning? It's like I'm actually lively, and I haven't spent all my
Yeah,
energy doing all kinds of other stuff. So
yeah.
I'm really excited.
Oh man, hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, where are you anyway? What part of the world are you in?
So I'm in Wyoming.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
the
So
West Coast. Yeah.
yeah, mountain time.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Rhode Island, in right outside of East Providence, Rhode Island, and I moved here to northern Germany 13 years ago, where my wife was born and raised. We're in a little village of
Really?
about 2,000. Yeah, it's crazy.
Oh man.
Of
Well,
about 2,000 people.
we better get this
Yeah.
thing rolling then, because there's a
All
lot
right.
of
Yeah.
history
Let's do
here.
this. Yeah. I
Okay.
feel like it's that. Do you ever listen to the Mark Maron podcast? Have you ever
Yeah.
listened to his stuff?
Yeah,
I
yeah. I
love
love
it how
that.
he just, at some point, as he's in the garage with whatever guest, he just must push the button. And every guest is like, wait, are we rolling now? And he's like, yeah, we're recording. I love
Oh
that.
man. Well, I can't wait
Anyway, go
to
ahead.
to get to talk to you a little bit more and learn about your a little bit of your origin, because it seems like there's a fascinating story there, but there's so many facets to your writing as well. You're a writer, but you're also a musician. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny I'm 49 years old, man. I'm still not comfortable calling myself a writer. I'm still not comfortable calling myself an artist. It's like, when am I going to be ready to officially say, yeah, man, I'm a writer?
I think
But
officially right
yeah,
here.
yeah, no, that's right. Today's the day. Yeah, writing has been it's always been part of my life. Always kind of, one of those guys that always had the notebook and jotting stuff down, usually darker thoughts that when I was younger I probably didn't quite understand, why I was doing it, or what value it had. And then as I got older and, in my mid 30s, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it, I was thrust into this nightmare of kind of depression, anxiety, panic attack stuff that
Mm,
threw me for a loop, man, because I had until that point in my life had never really dealt with that stuff. And that's when the writing became much more intentional, right?
mm-hmm.
I feel like there's that. Intuitively I was just always writing and like the idea of writing and stuff like that. But when I was faced with that depression and the monster, then it was more intentional. Where I was like, oh, I have stuff that wants to come out, and I'm going to sit down and actually take the time to do it. And that was kind of even though music has always been a part of my life. The songwriting really all started at that time, very much kind of influenced by the this fear that I don't know how much about all the depression stuff, but for me it was straight up panic attacks and the fear of having panic attacks that was driving me cuckoo. And
Mm.
yeah, and I always kind of thought of it as a kind of a monster chasing you um in your brain or whatever, however it works. And that was kind of the beginning of where I really was like, oh, I want to, I want to kind of write more stuff that I'm trying to make sense of. And yeah, man.
So let's kind of backtrack a little bit more, because I think it sets the stage for your earlier life. And you mentioned that you were from the East Coast, right?
Yeah, born and raised in Rhode Island, had kind of a storybook, very solid, healthy upbringing where I was on a my parents built a house on a big 50-acre farm, a gentleman's farm, for lack of a better terms, of my grandfather, and we had this real idyllic kind of childhood, where it was my brother and I, and we were around my grandparents, and we had the animals, and um, and all the toys that boys love to have, motorcycles and three wheelers and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, really, really wonderful. And then when I was 12, 12 and a half, uh, in December of 87, I was complaining. I had been complaining to my family about the lack of kind of blood circulation in my left foot. It's almost like pins and needles type thing. And my knee kind of bothered me. And, I was a typical 12-year-old boy, so kind of always running around. And at some point, my dad was finally like, okay, let's pop into the walk-in clinic in East Providence. And the doctor took a look and said, oh, let's get an x-ray. And he walked back into the room, and I was only 12, but I knew by the energy in the room, something wasn't right. And he quickly knew that. He sent us that. He said, we're going to send you over to the bigger hospital in Rhode Island and in Providence, and something's going on in your knee. And they knew immediately it was a cancer, completely kind of engulfed in my femur bone and my knee, and that was what was causing the lack of blood circulation. And yeah, man, from there I went from being a super healthy, normal dude to 2 years of just, essentially thinking I mean, I didn't realize how close to death I was, because I was a strange kind of one of those kids that just didn't really realize the weight of what I was going through. For me, it was just life. But yeah, they found it. They tried to save my leg for 2 years. Ultimately, they amputated my leg to the middle of my thigh, and had tumors in both my lungs, and had chemotherapy for a year and a half. And yeah, so crazy. Much in retrospect, now that I have 4 kids, much heavier and much more kind of emotional journey for my family than it was for me, which I know people kind of struggle to understand that. But, I was a 12-year-old boy. I didn't know. I wasn't one of those people that was asking, like, am I going to die? I just kind of was like, oh, another surgery. Okay. Oh, more chemotherapy. All right, whatever. And I kind of just went along with it, and ultimately was very, very, very lucky to have come out the other end, because the chances of my survival were at some point about 0%.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, crazy. And I also I had, in retrospect, I had a bunch of kids that I was going through the same cancer with. It's called osteogenic sarcoma, who were dying around me. And again, for me, it was just like, oh, okay, well, got to get through some more stuff. And ultimately I did, at about, I guess it would have been in ninth grade, they finally amputated the leg. So, and that was for me also kind of fascinating in retrospect as an adult. 99% of people that you meet that are amputees, it would be the most tragic, thing that happened to them. And for me, it was actually almost a win, because I was this really sick boy I had my leg, but it was completely infected and no longer working, and just a total nightmare. And I wanted it gone. I wanted to move forward with my life. Even at 14, I knew that I wanted to just start life. So when finally the doctors were like, well, we can't save the leg. We're going to chop it off. I was like, all right, let's go. So it, again, everything for me, I look back and I think it was all positive, which sounds crazy, but they amputated the leg, and the next day, because the staph infection was keeping me from going through puberty, it was keeping me from kind of living. The next day I was like, oh, okay, I'm back. Like, I had my energy back, and I started gaining weight, and my body went into puberty. And then, Yeah, and from there I never looked back, man. Very quickly learned how to walk with prosthetics, which in that late '80s was right when everything was transitioning with technology to more um, more plastics and so I kind of for me it was I had very wonderful high school times. I was healthy. I was normal dude. Really was big on not talking, not wanting to even recognize the fact that I was a handicapped guy,
Hmm.
which is kind of funny. Like for me, I was just a regular guy, but I definitely was not a regular guy. I had limitations. I was living with a handicap, but Lord knows I did not talk about it, and I just wanted to be a regular dude. And yeah, and I again had a real nice childhood up until that time. Caused all kinds of years for my parents that they just shut their lives down. My dad, basically stopped working. He has a family business, and we lived in Boston for 2 years while I was going through this thing.
Wow.
And then yeah, it's pretty crazy, right? For me, it sounds so normal, but I know when I tell the story, people will be like, "Oh my God, that must have been terrible."
Yeah, and I have to say, it's really admirable the way that you have been able to, whether it was just by the timing of the time period of when this stuff happened to you, or maybe just your personality, that I think there's something extremely special about your ability to overcome that kind of intense situation and come out on the other side feeling like there's just kind of a renewed sense of it seems like purpose and joy and all kinds of things. What was it like for your family at the time, like coming over the other side of that?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't just family. It was. I remember it. First of all, I agree with what you're saying. I think it was both what you said. I think the timing was I was at that age where I was still under my parents' kind of like whatever they said I should do, I did. Like, I was only 12. I was not an adult yet, and I was a young 12. I was an immature 12. And and I also was always kind of, for lack of a better term, a bit of a free spirit. So, I was just one of those kids that was, I think I did see, even as a child, nature versus nurture, saw the cup half full. So I, I think it was luck of a lot of things. And I remember in college, my best friend growing up, he was going to school he went to UMass to be a teacher, and he had an assignment to write a children's book, and he wrote this children's book and illustrated about me.
Oh, wow.
And it was really sweet. So he's like, "Oh, I got to show it to you. I did this project, and I got an A, and blah blah." And in the book, he's like, he talks about me losing my hair and all the steps that we went through because he was a big part of it. And he was like, and we all thought he was going to die. And I remember reading that page, and I was like, "What are you talking about, man? What do you mean you thought I was going to die?" And he's like, "Oh, well, everyone just assumed you were not going to live." And I remember I was 8. Yeah, I must have been 18 or 19, maybe. And I was like, "Really?" Like, that's how naive I was. I was like, "Really? You guys thought I was going to die?" And that's when I started speaking to my family about, like, "Oh, it was really bad, huh, guys?" Like, we dealt with it in such odd ways, I think, in retrospect. And another story kind of that speaks to that is, I remember I must have been in high school at this point. I was real close with my grandmother, and I had learned about the Depression in high school, the Great Depression. So I went to my grandma and I was like, I called her Nani. I was like, "Nani, what was, like, did you go through that? Do you remember when there was, like, food shortages or those type of questions
Yeah.
that I, and she was remembering some of the stuff as a kid and blah, blah, blah. And then I said, "What's the worst thing that ever happened to you in your life?" And she was like, "Well, I guess you." And I'm like, and I was kind of like laughing. I'm like, "No, really." And she's like, "No, what, you getting sick was probably the worst thing that ever happened to me and the family." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like,
Mm.
I couldn't believe that, again, how much I had affected them. Because to me, it just wasn't that bad. So I'm just, again, it's funny in retrospect that from 12 to this age of 18, 19, I was so naive and so kind of like, "Uh-huh, that's just how my life was." And So yeah, it's luck. I think it's luck. When people ask how did you do it, it's like I think I was just a dumb kid, you know, not intelligence dumb, but just like a dumb, naive kid who was like everything will work out, which that has actually been a part of my life until now of 49 and has gotten me in trouble. That ultimately
There's an
that kind
optimism
of
there. Yeah, that
there's an optimism that sooner or later it catches up with you because like when you try when you try and make a living and have a career and your general personality is like yeah, everything will work out, like that's not exactly the you don't want that on the top of your resume, which
yeah.
ultimately I ran into some, in my 30s when I was trying to make a living and I was working with the family business, that lack of ability to kind of be more serious that you need to be as an adult. I mean, at some point you kind of got to, when I got married and started having kids and got a real job and bought a house, you kind of got to be serious. You got to pay your bills, and I was not really able to do that. If I'm honest with myself, and it took me a long time when after having this falling out with family members. If I'm more honest with myself, that is a bit of a flaw, and I don't want to be too hard on myself because it really is who I am. But ultimately, a lot of times I can be almost too silly. Maybe that's the artist in me where I it's hard for me to take anything serious. Also,
Mm,
could be that when you're faced with death at 12, even though it could have been kind of not so, maybe it was subconscious, perhaps. But if you're faced with that kind of stuff and that need to get through things, maybe that was a defense mechanism like you had mentioned before. So but yeah, I'm still like that, man. I'm still like I listen to the universe, whatever the universe tells me to do. I'm like, oh, I guess that's what I got to do.
yeah, yeah.
So it is definitely a personality type.
No, that's wonderful, and I imagine that any experience like that just liberates you in a different way that very few people can understand. So I think maybe intuitively, or maybe you've internalized something from that age, and it's sort of amplified some of those things from an earlier age. But I was going to ask you about family because becoming a parent is such a huge aspect of our lives, and you're going along this journey, and now you have this new chapter of your life. How do you make it work, or how does the rest of you, which is the music, the writing, how does that make its way into fitting into your life as a parent, which I imagine is a priority for you now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I worked. So I come from a family with money. So I come from a family that has my great grandfather, my grandfather, my father, and now my brother have a big family business in based out of Rhode Island, but it's a national business. And so when I got married and had started having kids, I went to work just like I thought, men are supposed to do,
Mm-hmm.
at least in my family. Went to work and was working long hours and all that stuff. That would have been in my late 20s. And I very, very much knew that I needed to, using these words that ultimately got me, caused me emotional turmoil, that I needed to put my artist behind. I needed to put my guitar away. I needed to, be more serious, right? That
Mm-hmm.
was kind of
Sure.
the phase I thought I was having. And my wife and I, because we were a little bit older, we wanted to have a bunch of kids. We had 3 kids in 36 months,
Mm,
which is a very cool idea in theory, right?
yeah.
But in actuality, it's not that
Oh
much fun.
man.
So the stress level in the household was at an all-time high. I was working every day of the week for the family, enjoying myself at work, but working nonetheless, long hours. And then that responsibility, which I mentioned before, of paying bills and having a mortgage and all this kind of stuff. And parenting was, I'm kind of a loving dude by nature, so parenting became such an incredible, this incredible joy, even though it was stressful between my wife and I in the household. It was so beautiful. but it was definitely overshadowed by this darkness that was coming on. It was, in my mid 30s when I started just literally losing touch with reality, just having struggling to understand what was going on in my life, and which again, recently, a friend of someone in our family is going through these hard times of depression, and my 20-year-old daughter was like, I can't even, it doesn't even make sense. Like, I can't imagine being sad and just like being depressed. And I'm like, no, if you haven't gone through depression, you couldn't and you can't understand it, because it's it's so it's so illogical, right? That when your brain stops work, or your mind, whatever, however you want to look at it, stops working the way we expect it to work. If you haven't experienced that, then no. I said to my daughter, I'm like, luckily you can't imagine it. Unfortunately, I went through it, and because it got so, I was so close to not being able to no longer kind of live. I don't know that I was suicidal, but I just didn't want to keep living the way we were living. So my wife and I made this tremendous change of, we packed up our house, in a container, shipped it to Germany. Literally no plan, nowhere to
Mm.
live. We just moved to Germany because that's how dark a place I was in. And my wife knew it, and she was like, "Do you want to go to Germany?" I'm like, let's go make a change. We'll figure it out when we get there. So me and my wife and my 6, 5, and 3-year old,
Wow.
um, yeah, we moved to this little village where I don't speak any German. I do now, but at the time I didn't. And we moved into this is a great story, man. We moved into the household of my mother-in-law, who had a 95-year-old mother living there, her 95-year-old mother, so the grandmother of my wife, my mother-in-law, the son and his wife and his 3 kids. And then we moved in there. So there was 4 generations living in this household, and they were just like, come on in. We'll find beds for
Mm.
your kids. You guys stay on the couch. And I was really struggling at the time, and they knew it, because I was not socially, I just wasn't in a good place trying to figure it out. But my wife went back to work. We found a place to live. She quickly went to work here. She has a master's degree in psychology, and I stayed home raising the kids. And as a guy from a family business that the men work
Hmm.
and the women stay home, um, I all of a sudden became the kind of stay at home dad, and man, it was the greatest experience I could have ever dreamed of. I don't know that I ever thought I'd have that experience, but to be the to have to be the guy that is taking all the responsibilities of the kids and the schooling in a language that I couldn't even speak German at the time, but I'm not afraid, so I was trying to figure it out. And then we had another kid.
Mm.
My wife got pregnant. We had a baby. So for the last 13 years, not only have I been a stay-at-home father for 13 years, but I also introduced music and writing back into my life. It was kind of a slow process, but um, it's been as a guy, and I hate to say that because it sounds sexist, but all I can say is from my world, I assumed that I'd be the one that makes a living, and my wife would stay home and take care of the kids. But to take on that role was something that I feel so blessed to have taken, and given whatever I lack in parenting skills, which I'm sure is, my wife would argue, are many, because I am definitely not a disciplinarian. I'm I definitely give a lot of love to my kids, but they've done so wonderfully that they're 4 incredibly well-adjusted kids, and I'm so damn proud of them. 3 of them are on volleyball scholarships in the United States.
Oh,
We're a
wow.
volleyball family. Yeah, isn't that crazy? So they're all in the States now studying, and I got a 12-year-old still at home. But throughout that time, music was I always had a guitar in my hands. I found this community of wonderful musicians that kind of took me in, as I think in any foreign country, and certainly here in Germany, an American singer, songwriter is always kind of there's always a want for a real, American guy who sing. I like to sing blues and rock music, so I quickly found a place, and the writing very organically, never forced it. I wasn't stressing about trying to, make it as a musician at that point in my life. I wasn't trying to make it as an author. I just kind of always had a pen, a pencil, and a notebook around, and things started happening. And it's been amazing, man. In fact, it's kind of cool that we're talking today. My second album dropped on Spotify and all the streaming platforms today, August 1st. It's an album that I'm very proud of that I made in Chicago last year.
Mm.
But the writing and the artistic part of my life has been as important to me as anything possibly could, with regards to keeping my mental health in check. There's such, for me, it's so directly related of, in order for me to stay healthy, in order for me to continuously understand how my mind does or doesn't work, it directly kind of correlates with writing and getting that stuff out. That, I don't know that it's poison, because it's, darkness is part of us, like those dark thoughts, that it's all part of the way my brain works anyway. But getting those things out for me is, I guess that's my therapy. I don't talk to a therapist, but my therapist is sitting down here in my little cave, much like you're doing there, and kind of working things out as best I can. Right.
Yeah. And there's so many things that I want to ask you about parenting, as well as the creative process. And we're going to get to that in just a moment. But I want to like be in communion here with you, because I totally get what you're talking about in terms of how you feel like you have to set things aside for good. I think there's a moment when you become a parent, or something snaps up there in your mind that forces you to say, I'm not gonna be a kid anymore. And if I go back to the arts or something like that, I'm somehow a lesser parent. And I think there's a lot of things that I'm projecting here in the situation. So forgive me if that's what's happening. But it's like, when I first had my first son with my wife, I had this feeling like my time as a creative person needed to stop forever. And so, like, you mentioning that and sharing that, just completely, I totally empathize with you on that. But I love that there is a way that you have been able to merge it with your emotional needs. And I do believe that it's the best medicine that we have. Is I recall being the most miserable I've ever been, not because I was a new father, not because, like, things weren't going well, financially or emotionally or whatever, but it was because I wasn't expressing myself. And for some of us, that's really like the primary thing, the thing.
Well,
Yeah.
and this bizarre feeling, I'm trying to make sense of what you're saying, is that weird feeling of feeling guilty. I think when, at least now with this modern parenting, I know things were different in past generations, but now you're supposed to be all in, man. You're supposed to be like, helicopter parenting is normal now, right? So if you're taking time away from your kids by doing anything other than, spending every second with them, I think that guilt that also is like, this is all new. And, everyone's different, right? I always say that when I try and explain to non-musicians or non-artistic people about this process that you're kind of talking about and that I've struggled with, the Slashes and, the musicians that we know, they were born to be artists. Like, they're 18 and they're already writing hit songs and they're traveling the world and they're on stage, right? That was their path, man. Like, that's what they were born to do. And they didn't question it. Perhaps guys like you and I, who, it doesn't make us any less artists than them, which is something I struggle with, even kind of consider myself an artist. It's just, it wasn't as clear to me, man. I didn't I'm 49 now, and now, just now, I feel like I'm starting to find my, like, now I'm trying to figure it out. Wrote a book that I'm super proud of. I'm not Shakespeare, but I did it, right? So I'm super proud that I got a book done, and I have a bunch of songs that I want to put out into the world. And I actually think the process, the fact that I'm allowing it to be more organic, and allowing it to kind of unfold, has allowed me to enjoy it more. I think there's been times, what you and I are talking about, like, for instance, when I finished writing the book, I'm like, okay, now I gotta find a publisher, and then I gotta sell the book, and I gotta, and that kind of, so now I start creating this stress, and this anxiety around this beautiful project that I just did, which is like ruining so I think as I get older and start to make sense of this crazy life that we all have, it's like, yeah, man, it's all supposed to be good. That saying, that enjoy the journey. It's so the reason you know, it's such an important statement, is it's so true, man. Like,
Hmm.
like this process of trying to figure out how to, sitting here talking to you about how the hell this all works. This is important as finding a publisher for my book, right? Like, because I'm getting value out of this. I'm trying to figure it out. And when you and I are done talking, I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, I think I learned some stuff. Like, shit, that's cool, man. If I can learn stuff every day, I'm good with that.
Yeah. So let's talk about Songs for Ivy, which is your latest book here. Can you tell me a little bit about the origin story there, and how this book came to be?
Yeah. Well, always been a big reader. So reading's always been a part of my life. Before Kindle, now I'm a Kindle guy, but before that, my wife and my family were always buying me books, hard copy books, and I'll read anything. So one cool thing in here in Germany is our kind of big grocery chain. It's called Edeka, and they have one at, they're huge. It's typical supermarket, and at every one of these they have like a, what it was, like, leave one take one type book area. You know
Oh
what I
yeah,
mean? Like, you can drop off books. Yeah,
like a community
it's very
library
cool.
thing.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
little corner. And every single time I go shopping, which is twice a week for my family for the last 13 years, I swing by, and usually there's one or two English books there. And it doesn't matter what it is, I grab them and I read them, which is very cool because it's all over the map. It's completely random. And then also my family would always send me books. So the Christmas of 2016, my daughters were at that age where they were also reading a lot of young adult stuff, YA books. So they got a bunch of things, and as I'm sitting there after Christmas, after we opened our gifts, I was reading through the back of their books, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's a good idea. That's interesting. It literally popped into my mind. That was really the beginning years of for me of songwriting, where I was really focused on it. And I was like, oh, I think I'm going to try and write a book. Like, I could do that. I'm raising my daughters. I'm watching them. They would have been at this time 15ish, so having boyfriends, all the stuff. And because I was spending so much time with them in the car, bringing them to volleyball practice, and I was the primary parent, and very kind of uh very present, right? Very present in the moment. We we weren't big on technology, so we were talking and laughing and constantly communicating. So I was very involved, right? And I was like, I think I can write a book. Like, I'm going to try it. So that would have been January of 2017. I just sat down, much like I do with songwriting, very much waiting for inspiration. Not, no plan, no, and I know there's different ways to approach writing books. Um, but for me, there was no, I didn't do any outlines. I just sat down with my computer, and I was like, all right, let's see how, and just let it flow every single day for 18 months.
Wow.
and I had my computer on me all the time. And if I had a 10-minute break between wherever I was, my computer came out and I would write. And no plan on how many stories we're going to, how many characters. The way the book, this particular book ended up is the main character is a 16-year-old girl, volleyball player, and kind of uh, her journey in this time frame of life where I was watching my daughters go through, and and then the kind of secondary character is a 16-year-old boy who went through the same cancer as I did, and was but didn't survive. So knew he was terminal, and left a and started writing a journal to leave to his then younger sister Ivy, for when she died and when he died from the cancer, and and he left it to her for her 16th birthday. So that was kind of the main character, and that's how she within this the whole book she's reading chapters of the and getting to know him, getting to know her family, and it's helping her make sense of her relationships with her family. And then from there, and within the book, there's I guess three or four other kind of storylines that are interwoven. And but again, much like the songs, I really let it flow, man. It was the characters are based on the people that impressed upon me the most in my life. It wasn't planned. It was the most of them on the darker side. I tend to, for some reason, the people that affected me most, or maybe had the most impact a lot of times, were people that were facing drug addiction or facing, stuff that maybe that's the reality is when we do have those those demons and we have to face them. Maybe that's the only way we can really truly learn. It's kind of easy to learn when everything's rosy, right? Like
Yeah.
if life is perfect, then yeah, I guess it's fairly easy to learn, but maybe not. Maybe you can only kind of feel it and learn it when things are dark. So um the book has some darkness in it. It deals with some issues like suicide and drug addiction and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, it's a book about humans and flaws, and it was awesome. It made me nuts to from a time frame standpoint, without even thinking about it, to constantly trying to stay in that I don't know what else to call it, but to try and get into that flow where you're just letting stuff out without trying to think about it too much. That was exhausting, and I exhausted myself doing it. I was getting up early in the morning, and trying to get a few hours in before the kids got up, but yeah, it took me 18 months. Um, got uh, got ended up at about 130,000 words. I then threw some money at it and worked with a wonderful editor that she's based out of Israel. She helped me tremendously, man. She helped me understand how to truly edit from a kind of a high level, and she helped me get the book down to about I think it ended up at around 85,000 words, which is pretty amazing. She would just be like, this chapter is gone. You already talked about, you already said this. You already told the reader this. So she was really wonderful. I trusted the hell out of her. And yeah, the book got finished. It took, I let it simmer for about a year, which I think, I know for me, letting things simmer is super important. I find that, if I write a song, it always seems to want to sit for a little bit and kind of breathe. And then when I go back to it, I'm like, okay, now it makes more sense. And then it can kind of find itself. So I let the book breathe. Again, I tend to use the word organic, but um, when it wanted to be ready, it came alive and worked with another editor in Rhode Island to kind of tighten up the, I don't know, what would you call that? The word editing part. The woman from Israel really helped me edit the story, and then the person from Rhode Island helped me kind of truly edit the book grammar wise and all
Like
that stuff.
line editing, right? Or
Yeah,
yeah.
line editing, exactly. So yeah, and then ultimately I don't know much about marketing. I never really tried to find a publisher. I published it myself, put it out on Amazon, and with the friends and family that have read it, it means the world to me when they tell me they like the book. And what more is there? That's all I need, I guess.
Yeah, and I gotta applaud you for that. I mean, it's not easy to get over the line on that big of a project. I mean, I can imagine that that was a huge leap going from mostly writing songs and writing in what I imagine is collaboration when you're doing a lot of music projects. Everyone has kind of a bit of an input there, but being on the other side of it when you finish your manuscript, what was that feeling like? Can you put me in that moment when you realized that you had something there? And emotionally, because of the nature of what you're talking about, even though it's not your life, it kind of is, and there's a lot of things that are being lifted from your own experience. What was that feeling of relief or release, as we had been talking about, like?
Yeah, beyond. I mean, I have struggled all my adult life with the emotion that I struggle with is shame, and I don't know why. I can't make sense of why I feel this shame of not being good enough, not being talented enough, not making enough money. So maybe that's what we all. I don't know. Maybe that's what we all struggle with. But I know for me, it was the shame of not having success, whatever the hell that means, right? I mean, I don't even know if that makes sense when I say it, because I have four wonderful kids. I have been with my wife for 30 plus years. I'm a happy dude. For all intents and purposes, I am successful. But this emotion to this day that I deal with is this feeling of being ashamed that I haven't done anything. So those moments of the day the book arrived, from in its packaging, and when I look back at how many people helped me move it along, because yes, I did write the first 130,000 words alone, yeah, 100%, and I'm super proud of it. But from there, between the editor and even my mom, like my mom was like, "You have to put the book out now. It's been, you got to do." So even she would like push me to kind of, once it was done, and the same thing with this album that dropped today. It's like there is a feeling of, man, like yeah, I did it. I did. It doesn't make a difference if it's an amazing product, and it doesn't make a difference if it's gonna sell 100,000. It's For me, it's cool when I start something and I finish it. It
Mhm.
it just gives me a moment of clarity to say, dude, you're okay, man. It's all,
Yeah.
you're not a piece of shit. You're not a failure. You're all right, man. So
Yeah.
the book was a big one, and I am very proud of the many of the stories are things that I dug into, like you were saying, is, things I probably hadn't thought about, maybe ever. Maybe I had never gone back to think about the stuff that I experienced, the sounds, the things the doctor said or the nurses said when I was actually in the hospital, or um, and I really dug into that stuff. So, which wasn't always easy, but it was always good. There was always times when I know there's this is a very specific memory, and I don't know that I even remembered it, but after they amputated my leg, so I have only about 20 centimeters of femur bone on my leg, right?
Mhm.
So on my left leg, on my thigh. So so the day when after they amputated my leg, they wrapped it with a cast. Like, so to keep the swelling down, they wrap it really tight, so for the first, let's say, week or 5 days anyway, let's say, it had this tight cast on. And I woke up and I was eating, it wasn't not so much pain. So my doctor, his name is Dr. Mark Gebhardt, he took the cast off, just he and I. We were just he and I in a room, no nurses or anything. And he took the cast off and he undid the bandage. And so the first time I saw my stump, like, I'm a 14-and-a-half-year-old kid, and I'm like, okay, all right. And he's like, it looks good, Carlos. It looks good. And I'm like, I don't know that it looks good. Like, there was, even for me, there was some levity there where I'm like, I kind of disagree, but okay. Like, it's kind of gross. And, so, and I don't know that I remembered that moment, but, when I was trying to find these things to write about for this character, those things came out. And in that same day after he was done, kind of making sure that everything looked right, he had to then roll on like this, like what do you call those socks, that compression socks? You know what a compression sock is, for if you go on the airplane or something? He had to roll this compression sock over my stump to keep the swelling down. So he was like, I didn't know what he was going to do. He's like, hey, this is going to hurt, so you got to be ready for this. And I'm like, all right. And he rolled this thing on, and I just remember seeing stars, because I was like, holy,
Wow.
So yeah. 14 and a half, like, it's again, I think that happened. So that experience, I had that experience, and I'm not sure I ever talked about it again. I don't know that I even probably shared it with my parents. Like, it happened. And then I was like, all right, well, that's over. And now, but I did take the time to dig into those things. A lot of that stuff, kind of dealing with, what phantom pain is. Have you ever kind of read about?
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Conceptually, the idea of, if you lose a limb, or you still have feeling there, right, from a nerve standpoint. And I did a lot of kind of trying to understand, because phantom pain's been part of my life for 30 plus years, right?
Wow.
I had never even thought about it. So about 3 times, maybe twice a month, I'll have a few hours of where it feels like there's a pin or a nail going through the bottom of my foot, or maybe or like a nail going through my chin. Like, it's very bizarre, right?
Really?
Because it's not logical, right? I have no foot, but the brain, after 30 plus years, is still sending signals down there. It recognizes something's wrong or something's not normal, and it decides to send pain signals to the brain, right? So it makes no sense. So I remember I was working in this in Germany. There's this company called Otto Bach, which is a huge prosthetic company, and I was working as a demo patient. It doesn't matter, but there was this 82-year-old gentleman, Erwin, really nice German guy. He had lost his leg when he was a teenager, so it had been 60 plus years. And he and I were talking in my bad German, and we're talking, and he kind of flinched, and I was like, "What's up, man?" In German, and he's like, "Oh, I'm just having phantom pain." And I was like, "You're telling me after 60 years you're still having?" Well, meanwhile, it's been 30 for me, so I don't know why it struck me as so ridiculous, but I was like, after 60 years, you're still getting? He's like, "Yeah, I still get them." And that like totally weighed upon me. I was like, that's crazy. So then I started trying to make sense of how illogical this pain that I'm feeling from a leg that hasn't been there for 30 years. But if we think about it, it's not that different. If you right now think of you've had your heart broken before, I'm sure, right? Like in high school. I know I did. So if I think of that, the girl that broke my heart in high school, I can get a physical reaction from that memory. So I can get kind of like, like flush with kind of maybe anger, or I don't know what emotion it would be, but that's as illogical as phantom pain, right?
Oh yeah.
Like,
yeah.
That happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago, that I had my heart broken. So why would I still have a physical reaction to that memory? That's no different than my brain telling me, hey, 30 years ago, they chopped your leg off, but I'm just letting you know it still hurts. So those are the type of things that by forcing by putting myself in that flow of saying, hey, let's try and find stuff that's in there. I think that's the value of trying. Let's see. That's the value of, as an artist, of trying to create, right? Those are those things that I just wouldn't have taken the time to process those memories or even look for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that for me those were all learnings, right? For me as an artist, to be like, oh, that's pretty cool, man. That's not something I would have thought of had I not forced myself to try and find things to write about. And that's the beauty of that. That's why I think everyone should try and write a book, man. It's like, try it, see what happens, man. I always say that to my buddies when they're like, oh, how do you write songs? I'm like, do it, dude. Try it, man.
Figure it out. Yeah.
See what happens. And they're always like, no, my lyrics sound cheesy if I do that. I was like, dude, all lyrics sound cheesy. You just got to believe them. If you sell them, man.
Oh man.
Yeah, but yeah, the writing process is beautiful. I love it. I mean, you're a writer as well.
Yeah,
you're a playwright.
Playwright. Yeah, I started writing plays and all kinds of stuff when I was a kid. But yeah, it's always been mostly plays because I can't get away from them. Like, there's no way. Like it.
That's your world. That's the world you're in.
Yeah. But this has been phenomenal, Carlos. I got one more question for you here, and I'm curious what's on the horizon for you in terms of, now you got this project taken care of and you got music still in your life. What's the next thing on the agenda?
The next thing will be another. I'm all in with making another album. This album that I just made, it's called Find Your Way. The artist name that I play under is C.K. Baker Band. The album, it's the first album I made with a real producer. So last year I moved to Chicago for 6 months and worked with this wonderful producer named Brian Deck. He's a real guy. He's a real name. He's worked with I don't know if you know Sam Beam's Iron and Wine. It's kind of Americana music.
Yeah.
He did a bunch of his albums and Counting Crows, and he took me on, which was, I feel so lucky that he took me on as an artist, and I had a blast, man. Time of my life. We made a 9-song album, and I got the bug. Working with the real producer it's a different game. It's a totally different experience because he really helped me find the songs that are in there. So the next step is to try and figure out a way to pay for another one, and I want to make another album with him. And then see what happens from there, man.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I know that as with any great guest, we just scratched the surface. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your time, Carlos. And I think that you're reminding me of something that's tremendously important, which is one's ability to accept the things that we have to work with and do the best with what we have. And for the way that you've gone about parenting, which I think is something that, again, I wish I could talk to you about hours because I have so many questions and, relationship things that I'd like to talk to you about. So maybe down the road, we could talk more about the album and more about that aspect of your life. But I really, I can't thank you enough for being this inspiring human being that's out there doing his thing and making things happen no matter what.
I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you giving me your time as well, man.
All right. Well, I will be in touch real soon on the internet. Just keep an eye out on that email. And it's been an absolute pleasure, man. I can't wait to check out the album. I hope to chat with you real soon.
Read my book, buy my album.
That's right.
I'll see you, man. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Ciao, ciao.